There is a kind of death that requires no coffin, no funeral, no grave, no public mourning. A man can keep breathing and still, in a deeper sense, already be gone, not physically, existentially. The body remains, but the person begins to fade from the world that once gave his life its shape. And if you look closely, that is exactly what happened to Peter Parker. At the end of No Way Home, Spider-Man survives, but Peter Parker disappears, not into another universe, not into literal death, into something stranger, into erasure, into social non-existence, into exile. And that is why the next chapter of this story may be far deeper than it looks, because it is no longer asking only what kind of hero Spider-Man will become. It is asking a darker question. Who are you when no one knows who you are anymore? Dostoevsky understood that there are forms of destruction worse than physical pain. In The Dream of a Ridiculous Man, death appears under the shadow of absolute nothingness. But beneath that lies an even more disturbing intuition. A human being can begin to disappear before the body dies. A man can lose his place in reality and still go on walking among the living. He can become invisible, unmoored, unclaimed. He can go on speaking, choosing, and suffering, and still no longer belong anywhere. Seen from that angle, Peter Parker has already passed through a kind of death. At the end of No Way Home, he makes a radical choice. He asks to be erased from the memory of everyone he loves.
What if everyone forgot who I was?
What?
They're coming here because of me, right? Because I'm Peter Parker? So cast a new spell. But this time make everyone forget who Peter Parker is. Make everyone forget. Me.
MJ no longer knows him. Ned no longer knows him. The world no longer remembers what he suffered, what he gave, or what he lost. He is still there, still walking the streets, still carrying responsibility, still enduring pain. But in another sense, he is no longer there at all. Because in a world where identity is sustained by memory, attachment, and recognition, being removed from the minds of others is not just loneliness. It is symbolic death, a death without a body, a death without mourning, a death without witnesses. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. This is exactly the kind of analysis we produce here. And this is where the story touches a distinctly modern wound. We live in an age obsessed with visibility, profiles, followers, likes, stories, archives, digital traces, permanent proof that we were here. To be seen now feels like proof that you exist. To be remembered feels like proof that you matter. To be recognized feels like proof that your life means something. Modernity has quietly turned visibility into a test of reality, and that is exactly why Peter Parker's fate is so radical. He chooses obscurity, he chooses anonymity, he chooses to go on doing good in a world that no longer knows his name. So the real question is no longer, how does Peter become Spider-Man? The real question is much deeper and much more unsettling. Who are you when recognition disappears? Who are you when your sacrifices become invisible? Who are you when doing the right thing brings no applause? Who are you when the good no longer earns admiration? Who are you when there is no audience, no validation, no gratitude, no memory? Maybe our age finds that question unbearable because it no longer knows how to live without external confirmation. And this is where the modern crisis of meaning enters with full force. One of the deepest wounds of our time is not simply immorality. It is loss of direction. People do not always lose themselves because they consciously choose evil. More often, they lose themselves because they no longer know what they are living for. They confuse secondary goods with ultimate ends, comfort with meaning, visibility with identity, pleasure with purpose, recognition with reality. That is why so many lives look full and still sound hollow. Our world is saturated with stimulation but starved for direction, full of consumption but weak in meaning, crowded with performance but emptied of center. And that is exactly what makes Peter Parker such a powerful figure. Our culture tells us that to exist is to be seen, that to matter is to be recognized, that to have a self is to be constantly reflected back to us by others. But if that is true, then Peter Parker really did die, because he lost precisely those mirrors. He lost the eyes that confirmed him, the memory that held him, the human world in which his sacrifice had a name. And yet he goes on. That is where the story rises above franchise logic and enters spiritual territory, because now it begins to ask a genuinely anthropological question. Is it possible to remain someone when every form of external confirmation is taken away? Dostoevsky would have understood that pain. There is a kind of suffering that becomes worse precisely because no one sees it. Public pain at least receives language, witnesses, and some degree of recognition. Invisible pain decays in silence. And that is where Peter lives now. He keeps protecting others. He keeps accepting responsibility. He keeps carrying the weight, but no one celebrates him. No one thanks him. No one remembers the cost. And that reveals something essential about heroism. Maybe real heroism begins exactly where recognition ends. Maybe the highest form of responsibility is not the kind that shines in public, but the kind that remains standing when no one is watching. And that exposes something terrible about our age. A generation trained to seek visibility no longer knows how to suffer in secret. It no longer knows how to serve in secret, love in secret, sacrifice itself in secret. It wants to do good and be seen, to love and be recognized, to serve and receive emotional return, to suffer but with witnesses, to sacrifice but without disappearing. But real life is almost never like that. The father who wears himself down for his family is rarely applauded. The mother who gives herself quietly is rarely celebrated. The faithful spouse, the loyal friend, the honest worker, the responsible child, the noblest part of their lives almost always unfolds far from the crowd in the silence of a hidden life. And maybe that is where maturity begins. The childish soul needs to be seen in order to continue. The mature soul continues because the good remains good even when no one sees it. This is where Spider-Man stops being just a popular character and becomes a symbol. Because Peter Parker embodies a truth modern man has almost forgotten. A person's deepest identity cannot depend entirely on what other people remember about him. If it does, then forgetting is enough to destroy him. Silence is enough to erase him. The absence of applause is enough to make him collapse. Maybe that is why so many people today live surrounded by comfort, technology, visibility, and consumption, and still feel profoundly empty. The deepest drama of modern man may not simply be suffering. It may be suffering without knowing why, living without knowing what for, being seen by everyone and confirmed by nothing. That is what makes Peter Parker so compelling now. He lost visibility, but not responsibility. He lost recognition, but not duty. He lost his place in the memory of others, but not his decision to keep doing what is right. That combination is rare, and it gives the story unusual weight, because now Peter is no longer just a young hero paying a price. He is a man learning whether goodness can survive exile. At bottom, this is not just Spider-Man's story. It is the story of responsibility without reward, of sacrifice without witnesses, of fidelity without applause, of love that continues without visible return. It is the story of every hidden death demanded by a serious life, not physical death, the death of vanity, the death of the ego that insists on being noticed, the death of the childish self that can only continue while someone is watching. That is why Peter Parker now stands closer to a great moral tradition than to ordinary entertainment. He accepted a form of disappearance so that others could go on living, and that brings him close to something older and deeper than superhero mythology. It brings him close to the sacrificial structure of human life itself. Spider-Man, strangely enough, begins to move toward Dostoevsky, because every mature life requires this in one form or another, to give without immediate return, to remain faithful without applause, to keep loving without constantly being handed back to yourself through the mirror of other people. Maybe that is the real poverty of our time. It is forgotten how to live the hidden life. We want to do good and be seen. We want to love and be recognized. We want to serve and be remembered. We want to sacrifice ourselves, but without disappearing. Peter Parker lost all of that, and still he goes on. So the deepest question in this story is not about power. It is about identity, what remains of a man when the world no longer confirms that he exists. Maybe what remains is the essential: character, responsibility, fidelity, sacrifice, love. In a world ruled by visibility, that may seem like very little, but maybe it is everything, because the good does not stop being good when no one applauds it. Responsibility does not lose its dignity when no one notices it, and hidden sacrifice is no less real for remaining unseen. Sometimes the highest form of heroism is this: to accept disappearance and keep loving anyway. What about you? Do you agree with this connection between Spider-Man and Dostoevsky? Leave a comment. I want to know what you think.